Okay, let's start. Hello, everybody. Today is Friday, and this is the first time we are actually doing the Friday technical talk for the skilled company. And today's topic is importing content from CSV files utilizing Drupal 8 Migrate framework. Our general approach to do this task will be by code reuse, meaning that less PHP, less merge request commands, less bugs. Because usually when you write some PHP code and you test it and then you submit a merge request, it all ends up by some Andrew or Andy coming to a merge request and telling you, hey, this is all wrong and you should not do it like that, please fix. So we will focus on writing less PHP code and more reusing the previously written code and getting more value by doing it. And another general approach would be build integration as in Lego. So you'll be using some small parts to combine them together into a migration that we really need. And our small parts will be different reusable plugins, and we will also be extending on what we already have in Drupal core and contrib modules. Let's first define what a migration is in terms of Drupal Migrate module. So migration is basically 3 steps. It's the source data, it's the process data step where you massage data, and then destination. And all 3 of these parameters are actually plugins in Drupal 8. So the source is a plugin, and it can be either SQL, JSON, CSV source, or any other. Processing data is also different plugins that allow you to validate incoming data, change it, massage it, so that it's prepared for the import. And then the destination plugin that actually defines where your data will be imported into. And it can be any Drupal entity. And all these things are described in one single YAML file, which actually defines what plugins to use and how to use them. So basically, it tells the Migrate framework to utilize these plugins to get the data from this source, to process it using these plugins, and then to put it into these Drupal entities using these plugins. So that's how it generally works. We will be using Migrate framework modules. And there are several modules. Some of them are really useful, some of them are not yet useful. And we will be using the Migrate module from Drupal 8 core. Then we will be using the Migrate Plus module that extends the migration group to be an entity and provides some shared configuration. So basically, several migrations can be grouped together into a migration group, and migration group can provide some shared configuration to every migration in the group. Also, Migrate Plus provides some additional process plugins, and the most useful are entity lookup and entity generate. We will see later how to utilize them. Second contrib module we will be using is Migrate Tools, and what it does is providing Drush commands to run migrations and basically administering the migrations, seeing their status, running imports, running rollbacks, and doing all the other things with migrations. And basically, what is good in utilizing migration is that it provides you with many tools that are ready there for you to use. And basically, the 2 most important features are it provides login for failed imports, so you can see some messages on why your import was failing, and it provides rollback, so you can import content and then see that something went wrong, roll it back, so basically delete it all and run import once again. The third config module we will be using is CSV source plugin. What it does is provides the plugin for the Migrate to actually understand the CSV file and use a CSV file as a source for import. I will also show you the skilled Migrate module. This is a set of extensions to the Migrate module that are so general that they can be utilized on any project. So basically, these are extensions to the Migrate framework that are already written, tested, and some of them we already used on some skilled projects. Some of them I wrote just for a Apavi project to utilize, but they are so general that they can be reused. And some basic things that Skilled Migrate provides is admin UI to run migrations, and it also provides a real batch process for the CSV source. So you can import just several rows from the whole file, and so go step by step in importing. And so also several process plugins, and another thing it provides is file assets uploading. So if your migrations require some files to be attached to entities, like user images to be attached to some contact taxonomy terms you will be creating, or some documents attached to your nodes, then file assets uploading is a feature you will be using. There are basically three ways to import into complex destinations. The most straightforward way is to write your custom destination plugin, where you can just on the PHP level code hack whatever you want using entity API, field API, and any other APIs Drupal provides. And you can basically do whatever you want with this PHP code. But it has some drawbacks, like this code is really project specific and it can't be reused for other imports migrations. And this is PHP, so it can contain bugs, it can contain some things that like you will do not according to the Drupal coding standards or some other things. So basically, the main drawback is that you can't reuse this code on another project. And for every complex content type that has some references to taxonomy terms with images, for instance, or some references to complex paragraphs, you will need to write this PHP logic from scratch for any other project. So we will not be using it for our case. We will be looking into two other ways. And two other ways are look up or generate dependent entities, like using the entity lookup and entity generate process plugins from the Migrate Plus module. And then we will be using dependent migrations. So basically, first migrations will be creating some basic entities, and then later migrations that run after these first migrations will utilize the created entities and entity reference them in our main entity that we are actually importing. The second approach also allows us to write some reusable process plugins, and Skilled Migrate provides several such plugins like text to Unicode encoding. And this plugin was already utilized in Skilled. It was just adjusted a bit and put into a general module, Skilled Migrate. Entity lookup revision, it allows to use entity reference with revisions fields that are utilized for some paragraphs linking. And also entity generate from source. Basically, it's extension of the entity generate plugin that allows to use more incoming data to actually generate an entity. So not only providing a title for the entity, but also providing all the other fields to create this entity. This is about our general approach to migrations. Now we will take a look at some useful Drush commands that Migrate Tools module provides us with. Basically, there are like 5 or 6 commands. The most useful are Drush migrate status, that will show you the status of your migrations. Then Drush migrate import, it will run your migrations, either all of them or the one you specify in a parameter, or you can also specify the migration group to run all the migrations from the group. And there are some other parameters for the Drush migrate import to actually run the migrations you want. There is also Drush migrate rollback. This is really useful when you are testing your imports, because basically you can import the content and then roll back it and change some configuration and then import it again and again until you get the desired result. And Drush migrate reset status. This is really useful if your migration like stopped in the middle of some process, there was some fatal error or any other stuff. So basically something went really wrong because you configured your migration really wrong in some way. Then you will use the Drush migrate reset status to actually reset the status of migration to some useful status so that you can utilize it further. And we will also need commands to work with config, because basically any migration and migration group is a configuration. And once it is imported into Drupal, you can't really change it through admin UI. You will change the YAML file, and then you will need to import it again for your changes to actually take effect. So you will be using Drush config import and maybe Drush config export to check what configuration is there in the Drupal. Another topic is running migrations from UI. Recommended way is actually to run it through Drush, because basically running migrations through UI has several challenges. It can be a memory limit, a PHP timeout limit, or some other stuff. And for now, for Drupal 8, there is no any general way to run any migration from the Drupal UI. There is some issue where the work on it is going on, but it's not completed yet. And Skilled Migrate module that I will be presenting today provides solution for CSV source. So basically, it allows you to split a huge CSV file into some chunks of data and process only a chunk of CSV file in one step. And it also provides admin UI to start this migration. And currently, there is no way to roll back through administration user interface. You need to use the Drush command to actually roll back a migration. And now several words about process plugins. So basically, process plugins are the core of the power of building migrations as in Lego, because basically they provide you with different small parts that you can mix and match to actually do the effect that you are looking at, that you are looking for. And I have listed the most usable process plugins that Migrate and Migrate Plus and Skilled Migrate provides you with. Callback process plugin allows you to run some simple PHP function. You provide it in a parameter for this plugin. The one function I used a lot is actually a trim function. So you can supply some string from source to this function, run a callback function on this string, and get the result back and use the result in your process further. Concatenation. It allows you to concatenate several values using some delimiter. Default value allows you to check on the incoming value, and if it's empty, then you can actually provide some default value for this field to utilize. Exploit plugin allows you to actually exploit a string using a delimiter, and then I would recommend after using exploit to actually use a callback trim function on the result to actually trim the values so that you have a good data to work further. File copy plugin allows you to copy file from some source place into some destination place. Flatten allows you to actually convert the nested array, like multi-dimensional nested array, into the one-dimensional array with just values. So it will take all the values from all the levels and put them into a one-dimensional array. Iterator plugin. This is a good one. It basically allows you to iterate through the array of values and do the same set of actions on every value. Migration lookup allows you to look up the results of some migration that was already run, and we will use it to actually update the nodes that were created by one migration in another migration. And I will show you an example of that. Skip on empty plus skip on value plugins allow you to validate the data. So basically, you can use skip on empty on some incoming source data and provide configuration for this plugin so that if some value is empty, then skip this row and write a message into the log saying that, hey, I didn't find this value for this row, so please check your data. And I have skipped importing this row. Entity lookup plus entity generate allow you to generate some like needed entities while you did not yet generate the main entity. So basically, if you are importing some into some node, into some content type that has references to some taxonomy terms that you need to create, or to some paragraphs that you also need to create, then entity lookup plus entity generate will allow you to do that. So if you have some link to YouTube coming in some column in your CSV file, then you can use this link to generate a paragraph with this field, and then to entity reference this paragraph in your main entity that you are generating. That's it for the presentation part, and now we have a demo. I will now check if you have any questions regarding the presentation, and then we will get back to the demo. Okay, checking questions. Okay, no questions so far, so let's get to the demo. Basically, the skilled migrate module provides you with import CSV link. And here it tells you, please verify migration group settings by editing it at migration groups. And here we have two migration groups. First one is location import, and second one is service provision import. Basically, we have here migrations into two content types. It's a location content type and service provision content type. To actually migrate some content, we need to provide CSV file to use. So this one is for location, Let's get this one, save it here. And for the service provisions, we also have some file to import. Save it here. And now we can actually see some status. We see that for the location nodes, we have 272 rows to process, and we didn't process any of it yet. And same for the service provisions. But in service provisions, we have actually two migrations. And the first one will actually create the service provision nodes, while the second one will use the results of the first migration and update some references. Because service provision content type has some cross-references to similar service provision nodes. So basically, we first need to create all the service provision nodes and then cross-reference them. Okay, so we've done our preparations. We will also need some file assets, and file assets are loaded as an archive that will be just extracted into some destination directory, and then migration will use files from this directory. We also will need some files for locations. And now we are ready to run our import. We can select the migration group to run, set a batch limit, and run it. And it will actually use a real batch. As you can see, the progress is changing, and we are just importing by 20 rows from the source CSV file. And then it reports you with the status that you can see the results at migration group. There is some miscalculation, but it can be fixed later. So now we can see that we actually had total and imported only 250 nodes, and we have 22 messages for the other 22 nodes. Let's take a look at them. And it will tell us the ref ID number from the incoming CSV source and tell us what the issue was with this row and why we did not import it. And this is really useful for us to actually validate the incoming data. Let's run another one. And as we have two migrations here, it will actually process not 160 nodes, it will process 320. Because we have two migrations on 160 rows from the CSV file. Okay, it looks like we are done. We can check the results. No messages, so everything was imported. So what actually happened, we've got some new content here, and let's first check location nodes. As we can see, there are some location nodes, and we have all the data here. Including some related postal codes and other stuff, and including taxonomy term reference to some created contacts. So basically what locations migration did, it also added some taxonomy terms into the contacts directory. There was a DRAT, and it also added a picture for this taxonomy term. So that's it for the demo, and now I will show you some code. So we will switch to the PHP Storm. So first about skilled migrate. This module is now only on a Apavi project. And what it has, it provides all the links for the admin UI that I showed. It provides two forms, basically files assets form and import CSV form, then some code to run batch, and several useful plugins. CSV limit plugin that extends the CSV source plugin from the contrib module, and then several process plugins. And what we can do with it is to write a project-specific module, that is Apavi Migrate, that will contain just configuration for our migrations. Let's take a look first at the location migration. So as I have already mentioned, the migration group allows us to provide some shared configuration. And what it does is that it sets a shared configuration for the source to use CSV limit plugin, take a file here, but as you could see on the demo, I was providing another CSV file to use by uploading it there. And then it also provides some shared configuration regarding the columns coming from the CSV file. And the actual migration is also just a configuration. And as you can see, there is source, process, and destination. Destination is entity node. This is the destination provided by the core Drupal 8 Migrate plugin. Source is just some additional values. So source will be these values from migration group, and then some specific values from migration itself. And then the main thing is the process plugin. Basically, it has many different processes to run. And as you can see, we are providing the node type as default value, and it will be location. We are using default value here because the CSV file does not know what content type we are importing in, so we're providing default value. We also provide default value for the language of the created node. Title is coming from the source title, and if it's empty, we are actually skipping the row. So we are using skip on empty plugin with method row, skipping the whole row, and there will be a message in the migration log that the title is missing. What you see here is actually a migration pipeline. What it does is it runs plugins one by one, and only the first plugin has the source, because all the plugins coming later will just get the value from the previous plugin and utilize that. Ref ID, again, it's just a simple field, and we are again checking that it shouldn't be empty. Location type, again, it shouldn't be empty. Then they are converting it to Unicode, and then they are using entity lookup. And location type is actually the taxonomy term reference, and we should not create it from the CSV file. So we are actually using a lookup, and they are lookupping the name. So CSV value contains the name of the taxonomy term, and if it's found, then it will just link the found taxonomy term into this location type field of the location content type. Address, again, skip on empty, and it's just a string coming into the text field. Postal code, the same thing. City, the same. So basically, any string value we are checking on empty and then converting to Unicode. Related regions. This is again entity lookup, and we are lookupping not by name, but by number. So the taxonomy term has a field that has machine name number, and we are using entity lookup plugin to actually look up taxonomy term by this number field and put a reference on it into our created location. Country is simple string. Telephone, again, skip on empty. For the facts, we don't actually need it to create a node, so we are just using the value if it is there in the CSV file. Email, again, we require that it should be there. And here comes an interesting thing. CSV file can contain up to 4 contacts, and we are validating every contact using the processing pipeline. So first, we check if the concatenation of all these 6 values combined is not empty. How we do it? We actually concatenating all the 6 values and then check that it's not empty. And here we have another configuration for the skip on empty plugin that is using a method process. It basically tells the migration framework not to skip the whole row, but to just skip this process pipeline if the concatenation of these 6 values was empty. So basically, we first create the concatenated string of 6 values, and then this value is used as source for this plugin. So skip on empty will check if all of these values are empty, then it will just skip processing all the other things that are coming later. Okay, so if we have some information in these 6 fields, then we need to process it to validate it more. Because basically there are 3 required fields. And this is first name, last name, and email. And what we are doing here is we are again using skip on empty plugin on first name, and now we are using a method row. So if the first name is empty, then we will skip the whole row and write the message that the first contact first name is empty, is missing. Please check your incoming data. But what is important, as I already said, this check will only fire if there is something in any of these 6 fields. Again, the same with last name and the same with email. And as you can see, we are using the source here. So basically, the processing pipeline will use either the value coming from the previous plugin, or you can override it and use the source from the CSV file. That's about validation. And you have validation for all the 4 contacts. Then, as you have seen on the demo, we were actually creating a contact with an image field. And what we will do here is we actually create some like temporary arrays here to actually combine them into one single big array of photos, and then to process this array of photos to create files, and then to actually create contacts with references to these file entities. The doc sign here, as you can see here, is telling the source plugin, not plugin, is telling that the source is actually not coming from the CSV file or from the source data. It is telling that you should use the destination value. And basically, this notation tells use value coming from the photos destination property. This is telling that here use photo1 destination property. So we combined the values of the files into the photos array, and now we use iterator that actually allows us to run the separate process pipeline on every value in this array. And basically, we are just using the file copy plugin to copy the file from the source full path to destination full path. And source full path, again, we are constructing it here, and destination full path is constructed here. And we were using some constants when we were constructing the array for the photos, and these constants are coming from the source configuration. As you can see here, we have a source and we have constants. And basically it tells us that the files are here, and you should copy them to this path from CSV files into avatars directory in the public file system. And it will just copy the files there, and file values now has the URIs of these files, of the copied files. And we can utilize these URIs to actually create the contacts. So we creating first contact with these values. We already validated the values. So again, we are constructing some temporary arrays and then combine them into one big array of contacts. And after that, we actually create location contacts. Again, iterator plugin over the contacts array, and it uses the entity generate from source. This is the plugin that skilled Migrate module provides, and it allows us to provide more values to use to create the entity. And basically, it will utilize all the values provided here, like first name, last name, email, telephone, image, and position, to create taxonomy term. Why the taxonomy term? Because as you can see here, entity type is taxonomy term, bundle is contacts, bundle key is actually vocabulary ID, and value key is email. So we are basically checking first the contacts vocabulary if there is already created contact with this email. If there is one, then we will use it. If there is no one, then we will generate one using the values provided here. And then it will also use some default values and set the language code as not applicable for this taxonomy term. So that's it. Then we will flatten this array coming out from the iterator and use this array as a value for the location contacts. So basically it will contain just the taxonomy term IDs to reference. For the paragraph, we actually generate the paragraph, again using the entity generate plugin. But then, as entity generate returns only the entity ID, and the paragraph field, not the paragraph field, but the field we are using to reference the paragraph is actually of type entity reference with revisions. We are using entity lookup revision that lookups entity by its ID, and then returns not only ID but also the revision ID, and they iterate through the results and process it this way so that the value is actually an associated array containing target ID and target revision ID, exactly what is required to entity reference a paragraph with revision. Related postal code is a simple multi-value field, and they are just exploding the incoming value and just using the values coming out of it to fill the related postal codes field. And then one line address. We could use some computed field to actually fill in the value of this field, but for now we are just using concatenation. And again, we are using a feature of not only using the values coming from the CSV source, but we can also utilize, we already computed values that are listed here. And so we are using the address that we already converted into Unicode, and the same with city and country, and just concatenate these values using some blank symbol. And then the entity will be created. So that's the only thing you actually need to do to put it all together and to import into some complex source. And now we will go to the second migration group. That is the service provisions migrations. This one. And it utilizes actually two migrations. So again, migration group is pretty simple. The only interesting values here is the shared configuration. So basically then we were editing migration group through the administration UI. We were setting a new value for this path to actually utilize the file we upload. And then it also provides some shared configuration regarding column names and delimiter used in the CSV file and some other fields. Then there is a migration. This is the first one that will actually create the service provision nodes. But it's mostly the same as what I showed you for the locations. Here you can see that after exploding the values, we are actually trimming them and then using entity lookup. And it lookups again taxonomy terms. So in the source file, there are some taxonomy term names concatenated using the comma, and then we are just to make sure that the lookup will be successful, we are trimming these values, and the taxonomy terms will be, taxonomy term reference will be filled in. Some work with the files. Yeah, this example contains actually creating the media entity of the document bundle and then referencing it into related document field. So you can review it later if you want. What I want to show you is actually the second migration. And what is interesting here is that it has migration dependencies. And you can see that it is dependent on service provision CSV. And this is exactly this migration. So this first migration creates service provision nodes, and after it completed, we are actually running a second migration. And the task of this second migration is to fill some references to the created service provision nodes. So there is a field on the service provision content type that is called like similar service provision nodes or something like that. And in order to fill this field in, you actually first need to create all the service provision nodes and then provide references to some other, to these created service provision nodes. So how it works? As you can see, the process is much simplified because basically the entity is already created, and we are only providing type, node ID, and then actually related service provisions field that we need to fill in. Type and node ID is needed to actually look up, to successfully look up and load the already created entity. So we are using migration lookup plugin that tells us you need to look up into the results of the service provision CSV migration, the previous one, by the product code key, and find the entity that you created for this row. So product code, as you can see, is a key in our CSV file. So basically, it's a unique property of a row, and we are telling the migration to look up the entity that migration created from this row and return the ID of the created entity. And if it was not created by some reason, like there were no some required values, then we are using skip on empty plugin to actually report that the service provision node from this row was not created by the previous migration. So check previous migration to see what went wrong with this row. And then we are filling in the related service provisions. Basically, it's again exploding the incoming value, trimming them, and then again looking them up, because what comes in a CSV file is actually the product code of the related entities, and then we can use this product code to actually find the IDs, the ID of the entity that you need to reference. And this is how it works. I believe that's it for the code. And now I will actually check again for the questions. The only question I see now was about where to get the skilled migrate module. For now, it's on Apavi GP code base. I believe we can get it from there and share on any other appropriate place. Just don't know what place we will use for that. There was some suggestions to dive into the code. Okay, will do. Regarding the update of the entities, Migrate allows to update the entities using the entity lookup. So you can actually load the already created entity, update some values on it, like I showed in the last migration, and save the entity with the updated values. Alexei, you are actually correct. So regarding your questions, what is the difference from Migrate source CSV except batch limits and forms in admin UI? The difference is really simple. Yes, it's the batch forms in admin UI, and then this short CSV limit source plugin that actually extends the plugin provided by the Migrate source CSV contrib module and allows to run migration from CSV in batches. This is really important for running migrations from administration user interface. And we actually had a task to provide some administration interface to run the imports. And the second one, as far as I see, it has a couple of processes which are really based on parent processes. Yes, indeed. So it has a couple of processors that are based on parent processors and just provide some missing pieces to utilize these building blocks inside your migrations. And the goal is to create these general purpose pieces, and then the project specific migration configuration can just utilize these pieces and do not write any PHP code at all. Like you saw for the Apavi Migrate, we have just migration configurations, and that's it. Okay. The name skill migrate was chosen to basically show that these are some extensions to the migrate framework. Regarding GitHub, 2 hands up, let's put it there. I'm open to any suggestions on how to distribute this code or anything. The goal of this presentation is to show you the power of the migration framework and how to utilize it better. So basically, I want us not to write some destination plugins with PHP and putting all the logic into PHP destination plugin, but rather utilize some general purpose small parts of code and just configure them for any complex migrations we have.